All right. So creating your school list, like I said, is one of the most strategic parts of your application process. And why is that? Well, once you've created you have an idea of who you are and the story that you're going to tell in your application. It's really important in order to catch schools' attention, because keep in mind they get thousands of applications, and they're going to be looking for people who are, hate to use this phrase, but a good fit for their school. They're going to be looking for people who can bring some value to their school. That's pretty much what they're doing when they're screening applications very, very quickly, right? They're going to be reading entire apps in like 5 to 10 minutes, trying to find out who should we invite to interview to our school. And so oftentimes people focus a lot on their own application and in terms of building up who they are. But med school, picking or getting into med school, dental school, PA school, any of these schools, it's almost like a dating game. There's so many people to choose from, and they have to decide who out of that giant pile of people are they going to bring in to meet. And so while there isn't any really cool algorithm that helps them do that, that would actually be really much easier probably. They use humans to select people to pull out. And so when we have humans selecting others to, decide who's going to be invited or accepted, there's a little bit of subjectivity there. There's room for some bias. There's room for just honest human preference. And so the reason why I think creating your school list is so strategic is if we know that they only have 5 or 10 minutes to read an entire application and they're looking for fit, then you can't tailor your entire application, your AMCAS or your ASDAS or anything to each school, because you're only using one app for every school. You instead figure out who you are and you pick schools that align with who you are, so that there's a natural connection whenever you go to apply. So it helps sort of expedite that process of building connections, because you've already done the work in terms of figuring out where you're a good fit. And I know that in the past, none of you, I'm sure, feel this way. But typically people are just like, I just want to get into any school. I don't really care which school I get into. Just let someone accept me. But of course, we'd all prefer, have our preferences. Like some people might be saying, well, I really want to get into an in-state school. What do I need to do to get into an in-state school? I'm not here necessarily to tell you how to get into an in-state school. I don't honestly believe in my heart there is a surefire way to do that. I think that having the philosophy of I just want to get into any school is not really the best approach either, though, because, well, first we have to have a little confidence going into this process. You should already believe that you are very qualified to get into any school. And beyond that, we really want to try to get into the school that makes the most sense for us, right? We're also looking for schools where you're going to be happy and you're going to thrive and that have things that you're looking for. So we're going to try to move beyond this kind of mentality, and we're going to try to create a school list where it's not that you're desperate to get into any school. Every single school on your list is a school that you would love to go to. It's a school that you select. So I put California on here because I know there's a lot of California people, but I want you all just to replace California with your state. I often find that people want to stay in state, and I get that. It's gonna, the in-state school is gonna cost less. You want to stay close to family, you're comfortable, everyone loves their state. But in the med school process, it's pretty common for people to apply broadly across the country. And it's very common for people to go out of state for med school. That's a very, very common thing. And especially for California applicants, about 60% of the applicants go out of state for med school. So that's a really big population of people who are leaving to go somewhere else. And so I want you to also keep this idea in mind as I go through all of these slides today. Keep an open mind about the possibility of going anywhere, because anywhere is not based on, we're not going to talk about costs right now. I'll tell you about why cost is not necessarily the factor to consider when you're choosing your schools. We're not considering any of that. We're really focusing on getting into places, getting into lots of places. And that's going to be based more on your strategic alignment with the school. So with that said, I know most people use metrics, meaning your test score and your GPA, as some type of screening mechanism. And I know there are tools that are built out there that will do that work for you. If you're applying to med school, there's the MSAR. I know ASDAS has I think they have a book, if not a website now. And I know there's plenty of sites for PA that will basically tell you sort of what your chances are. I use chances in quotes, by looking at your metrics. I'm here to emphasize that metrics are not the way to pick your schools. If this is the only way that you're picking your schools, you're making a huge mistake, because the majority of people who apply are going to fall within a certain range. And that range is going to be what I call totally acceptable. It means they're totally good enough. They could be accepted. There's nothing wrong with them, but their numbers are not going to get them in. Their numbers alone have nothing to do with whether they're going to get into school or not. And so you have to move beyond that. Once you have, numbers that are good enough, they are past the minimum requirements, then you are good enough. And so you have to focus on other things. I want you to also remember that you probably came from the fair this morning and you heard a lot of people asking about averages, and you might have heard some numbers that are making you feel a little panicky right now, if that's true. These are not minimum requirements. With any average, you're going to have people with much lower numbers and obviously much higher numbers. And so don't let the number that you see on their average scare you. It has nothing to do with you. I would just focus on the value that you bring. I also want to touch upon this safety versus reach school idea, that there are certain schools that you can apply to because they're safe. For most health professions, there is no such thing as a safe school per se. Almost all of these schools are very competitive to get into. And so rather than kind of thinking about picking schools that you think you have a better chance at, I'm going to challenge that a little bit and say that your idea of what you think you have a better chance of getting into has more to do with the schools that you naturally align with than it has anything to do with the rank of the school or your averages. And so what is a safety school for one person or a reach school for one person could be the opposite for the other, based on if someone is selecting a school based on their values and the things that they want out of a school. They might put a lower tier school way up on their reach school list because it's just simply where they prefer to be. So we're going to move away from the safety versus reach, and we're going to just simply focus on schools that you would be happy to go to no matter which one picked you. So if you have a list of 20 schools, each one should be equally satisfying to you in terms of where you'd like to be. Okay, and then I'm going to push you to go in half in-state, half out-of-state at least. Some of you might be applying to more schools than others, and so that might look a little bit different for each person, and it depends on the state you're coming from. But generally, if you can think about applying out-of-state as much as you apply in-state, I think that's a healthy way to go about this process. All right, so I already said this, but this is the goal that we're gonna kind of unpack today. So I'm gonna help you understand how to select your schools. So we're gonna first, in order to tie who you are with who they are, our first step is you have to know who you are. Now, I don't know how many of you light candles and sit around and sort of meditate on who you are as a person. But that's something you definitely want to think about as you go into the process, into the application process. And what do I mean by who are you? I mean, what are your values? What do you want out of your education? What are your long-term goals? What features of the school do you want to see? For example, are you wanting to serve specific underserved communities? And if so, do they have any programs that prepare you for that? Or are you interested in, let's say, a medical Spanish program? If so, do they have something like that? So figuring out what you want out of your career, your education, and then you find out step 2, what do they have? And so this is where we use this really cool tool. You might have heard of it. It's called Google. I know it's so annoying when people do that. And we're going to look up things that schools have. So how do we do that? How do we figure out who schools are and what they have? You literally open up a Google page and you type in, let's say you're interested in women's health. You type in women's health medical school. Okay, so that's a big search phrase, right? If you've done any type of lit review or search, you know that you get better at finding your phrases. So you say, let review, you go women's health, medical school. So a bunch of schools will pop up that have the phrase women's health. You start clicking on a couple, you look, you scroll through, you look for schools that look like, schools you've heard of. You click on that, you read, you go to the faculty page, you go to the research page, you go to the training site page, and you basically read about what they're doing. And then I promise you, if you start clicking around, that's gonna lead you to different links. And you're gonna start to see, oh, wow, well, this school has an entire, sub-internship in some specialty within women's health. And then you start to realize like, oh, that's pretty cool. I wonder if other people do that. So you search that. And then you realize, oh, there's about 10 schools that do that. And now you have a school list, right? You have about 10 schools that do this really cool thing that you discovered by just starting with a big search term. And so you could do that for all kinds of things. You could do that for medical Spanish, for addiction medicine, for problem-based learning, so many things. And so hopefully by the end of today, you have a pen and paper in your hand, you can write down some of these phrases that you're going to hear that might help you in searching for different aspects of school. After you have your school list, then your job is in the secondary process to tell them the value that you bring to what they have based on who you are and what you've done. So if a school has a medical humanities program and that's why you chose to apply there, and you really want to participate in their narrative medicine program, then you need to go back to what you've done in your past and show how, well, when I worked in the blah, blah, blah clinic, we practiced narrative medicine by listening to the patient's stories. And I want to bring that experience and build upon that by learning narrative medicine, in a more structured way through your blah, blah, blah program. So you find out what they have, you tie it to who you are, and you make that connection for them in your writing. And so as you get started, before we go too much further, what I want you all to do is I want you to go ahead and create your Excel sheet for your med school list. And before you know how many schools you're going to apply to, you need to figure out what your budget is. So if you get fee assistance, take that into consideration. And you're going to start to list schools. And as you list schools, I want you to begin to track the same information across all of the schools. And so this is an example of some of those factors you might consider. For example, every school you apply to, you 100% need to check the letter of rec requirement. Just make sure that you have what they're looking for. Prereqs are important, not a huge deal. It's very rare for schools to have really outliers in terms of prereqs, but it's always good to check if you're already there. Track the cost so you have an idea of how much you're going to end up spending. Track your location, but not just the city name. Do your best to dig in deep and try to find out more about the city. So for example, you can look at if it's a suburban or rural, how big is it? Write down the population, maybe describe the demographic breakdown. Do you know that there are only 3% Asian and 1% Black? Or do you find that there is 40% Black and 20% Asian? And does that matter to you, right? Like find out things that matter to you so that you can reference that when you go and write the application. And then you want to track the curriculum model, and hopefully you'll know what I mean by that, but you need to know if it's PBL or traditional, and you need to know about the clinical training sites. Are they right there? Is it a hospital they own on campus, or is it across the state? Are they shipping people across the state and putting them up in temporary housing? I mean, that's a thing. People do that. Schools do that. And then, of course, you should track your out-of-state acceptance rate at each school. Just make sure. And there are certain schools that are not very out-of-state friendly. University of Washington, a lot of schools in the South. So you just want to make sure that you're not wasting your money and time applying to places that are not happy to have you. All right. So there are many, many factors, like I said, to choosing a school. And we're going to go through as many of these as we can in a very, very short amount of time. And like I said, if you have any questions, please, please, please just unmute yourself and ask. And I'm happy to go into more detail if that's, if you need me to. Okay. So location is important. And I think that a lot of people start with location or geographic location because it's an easy thing to start with, right? You think about, where would I like to live? Do I want to live in only warm places, which I hear sometimes? And if you choose that, you're going to have fewer options. But if you think about the value that a location brings in terms of its actual demographic population. So for example, do you live in, if you study healthcare, medicine, dentistry, PA, if you study in an urban diverse city, what do you get from that experience that's different than a suburban or a rural city? They all have value, but being able to pinpoint what's specifically unique and valuable about each of these was going to help you, because when you go to apply to a suburban school, you're going to still need to articulate why it is you want to be there. And so if you can pinpoint, you could maybe talk about such a large hospital or a hospital with so many resources. Things like having a car and using public transportation, you might be thinking, well, that's not really that relevant to me right now. But trust me, it's going to be relevant to you very, very soon. And you might be thinking, what does this have to do with picking my schools? Well, you don't want to put any school on your list that you wouldn't really be happy to go to. It's really not fun to get accepted to only one school, and it happens to be a school that you would hate to attend. And so if you're the kind of person that really can't imagine doing your grocery shopping in a bodega and carrying your bag across town on a public bus, if you really like your car, if you like parking lots, you like shopping at Target, you probably need to stay out of the cities, right? New York City, Chicago, Boston, because those are not going to be really conducive to that lifestyle. On the other hand, if you're kind of looking for that fun adventure and you want to be in a diverse urban setting where you can see some of the best, you can watch some of the best health professionals, and you can witness a lot of sort of unique medicine, unique things happening, being in a diverse environment is going to be great for that. I see a question here from Tara. When determining if a school is friendly to out-of-state applicants, what percentage of out-of-state would that look like? I mean, I don't know if there's a golden rule, but I generally would think like at least 20%. If there's 100 people in their class and only 20 of them are from out of state, you have to compare yourself against the whole country. Are you in a position with your application to be one of 20? Most schools that are private are going to be a little bit closer to 50-50. That's a really good place to be, is a 50-50 situation. But if you know, anything below 20, you really have to like think about it in terms of numbers, how many people in their class are literally, and then also look at where those people are from. So for example, if you're looking at a state in the South, most of their out-of-state people might be in that region. So if you're from the opposite side of the country, your chances are pretty low because they're only taking people from that part of the country. And you know, just as kind of a joke, but if you're from a warm state and you really don't want to go to med school or PA school or anywhere that's cold, I'm so sorry, but you might just have to, you know, that's just kind of, it's only a couple years. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Sophie. Some state schools like University of Colorado, University of Michigan, there are some out there that really don't care about in-state, out-of-state, but many do. I know, not the cold, but you will survive. You will survive. I promise, Cerise. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something that's really important. Your curriculum model. What do I mean when I say a traditional curriculum model? What does that look like? What is it?
2+2.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Go ahead.
Like 2+2, like 2 years of like, yeah, like lectures, like Esther said, but then also, then the last two are like rotations.
So a traditional curriculum model would be 2 years of didactic learning, sitting in a lecture, and then 2 years of clinical learning where you're out in the hospital. And so that is a very traditional way that med schools have taught, and a lot of research and a lot's gone into showing how that's not necessarily the best way for people to learn. And so now we're seeing a lot of schools shifting gears and going more towards a problem-based or case-based learning environment. And so this is really important for you to know before you apply to a school, if you're applying to a traditional or a problem-based learning. What attributes or competencies would a problem-based learning school specifically be looking for in a student body when they're screening applications? Well, maybe I should tell you what that is first. Does anybody here not know what a PBL? I'm kind of assuming y'all do, but I should probably explain that. Give me a thumbs up if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now.
No clue.
That's okay. I thought maybe that was the case. Okay. So a problem-based curriculum looks something like this. And this picture I took is actually a real picture from the med school I worked at that did 100% PBL. So looking at this picture, these are all med students. At a lot of traditional schools, med students don't go to class. They really don't show up. They only show up for the tests. They watch the lectures at home and they basically learn on their own, and then they show up and take the tests. At a PBL school, that rarely happens. They try to treat the students like, they try to train them from the very beginning to think like health professionals. So you'll notice that at a lot of PBL schools, the students are kind of dressed professionally. They might be a little overdressed for this picture, but basically what happens is you get a clinical case. Let's say you get a clinical case on Monday, you get 2 cases. You're going to have some assigned readings to make sure you read before you show up to class. But you've read your cases, you have your 2 patients, you have their labs, their background, their, all the social determinants of health, everything about them. And you've done some background reading in the sciences. So you show up to class and you're in a group of 8 to 10. And as a group, you have to come up with a list of learning objectives. And what that is basically, how do you know what's wrong with this patient, and what do you need to know in order to figure that out, in order to treat them? So you'll, as a group, come up with questions that you need to know in order to diagnose and treat. Over the course of 2 years, usually you get 2 cases every week for 2 years. And so over the course of 2 years, students get better and better at figuring out what questions to ask, how to ask the questions better, how to find the answers to the questions, because that's the other part, is once you ask the questions, the group will divide and conquer. And they basically go out and find the answers to their questions. They find them through medical journals, through textbooks. The school will usually arrange some kind of presentation throughout the week with health professionals coming in to talk about the subject. But the students are basically doing most of the legwork on their own in terms of researching. So if you ask a question that's too big, it will take forever to learn how to answer that question. So they get better at asking questions to figure out, what exactly do I need to know in order to solve this problem? And that helps them get better at A, asking better questions of patients, and B, knowing how to find the answers to their own questions. Because when you become a health professional, let's say you're in the room and a patient presents with something, there isn't this magic screen that pops down that has multiple choice, right? Like there's some degree of, and you can't call a friend every time. I mean, maybe you can call your colleague, but eventually they're going to get annoyed if you ask them every single time what's going on with this patient. So you really have to go and find the answer. That's part of life, right? Is looking things up. Fiona asked the question, are there schools that combine? Well, it's not that yes, I mean, in short, there are hybrid schools that do a little bit of both, but conceptually, the goal of having students look things up is the process of learning how to do that. So when I was at the med school, the dean always joked, he said, we don't really need the students to memorize everything anymore, because, and he got out his phone and would shake the phone in the air. He said, everything you need to know is in this little computer in your pocket. Almost everything can be looked up now. And so there's a little bit less emphasis on just rote memorization, and a little bit more on application. How do you know how to look things up? And you still have to memorize because you're going to take the boards. But the students who go to PBL schools tend to perform a lot better on USMLE back when it was graded, because that's case-based. Those are case-based questions. And usually they're very focused on the boards, all schools are. So they usually give you questions out of the bank to practice with. And let's see here, Shelby asked a question. Oh, pertaining to the earlier, would research by what schools with this learning model use? I'm not sure what that question means, I'm sorry. Is there a list of schools' curriculum models, or would it be on? Yeah, they would be. I mean, I'm sure someone maybe out there has put together a list of schools' curriculum models, but truthfully, these are changing every single year. People are shifting over to more case-based learning. So I would make your own school list, and you can, again, Google problem-based learning, case-based learning, and you're going to want to do this research on your own. I am not a fan of people handing down school lists. Your school list should not be your friend's school list. And you don't need to go use a filter and put in criteria and come up with some arbitrary school list that some algorithm gave you. What you need to do is you need to do the work of going into the website and reading about the schools, because it's not just the name of the school that you need, but what you need to know is you need to be able to say out loud what it is that you love about that school, which you're going to get by reading the language on the website. You need to like actually internally understand what that school is about. And you're not going to get that if someone just hands you an Excel sheet with a list of schools on it. So if you skip the process of doing the research yourself and you just get the answer at the end, your list, you have actually failed, and you're not going to have a very good, you're not going to be able to write your secondaries. You're not going to be able to answer interview questions. I mean, you have to really internalize what it is about these schools that you really love. Like, to be honest, I really need you to fall in love with these schools when you apply, because it's that passion, that energy when you write your applications that's going to come out naturally if you do this work. So let me go to some of these questions. Is there, pertaining to the earlier question, would researchers be what schools? Maybe just rewrite the question. I'm so sorry. I don't know what you're asking. Are problem-based learning and case-based learning the same thing? Pretty much. There could be slight nuances with every single school's curriculum. Some schools are going to have 100% problem-based learning. Some are going to be maybe once a week or once a month problem-based learning. And then there's lots and lots of in-betweens. Interprofessional education is actually where they put medical, dental, pharmacy, nursing, PA students all together and have you learn cases together so that you can start to communicate with other health professionals. And that's a really, really good and cool way to learn your field, because you're going to interact with all these people when you become real professionals. So learning in that type of education environment is really good for training. So if you know a school does interprofessional education, I would actually mention that in your application in your secondaries about why you understand that's so valuable. You say, Emma said, you think the MSAR might have a note. That's good. So you can compile it there. Honestly, I probably would still go to the website because the MSAR is very limited on what you're going to find. And then what particular schools offer can change over time. So what works for someone else last year. Yeah, exactly, David. I just really think there's a lot of value in searching it yourself. So this comes into play more for the secondary. Yeah, well, it's not, okay, so we can say, oh, this is just for the secondary, so I don't need to do this right now. Actually, you need to do this because whenever you create your school list to submit to AMCAS, you need to know this stuff before you do that. I mean, you can submit AMCAS with just, or any of your applications with just one school on your list and do this work later. But this is essentially your school list. This is how you create your school list. And so, yes, you're going to share this in your secondaries, but let me pose something to you real quick. Let's say that you know 100% right now today that you are a problem-based learner and that is the way you want to learn your profession. Okay, there are enough schools out in the universe right now where you could pick your entire school list just based on that. And if you did that, or you wanted an interprofessional education, you knew you want to learn alongside people, or you want to touch patients from day one. If that's the case, you create your school list that only includes schools that have something that you want. Then when you do your primary app, when you write your personal statement and you tell your stories that showcase the values that you bring, the skills and the attributes, you can actually highlight the attributes that they would be looking for in that curriculum model, like being able to communicate with your peers, being able to think critically, being able to find information on your own. That's called being a self-directed learner. A lot of students are self-directed learners and don't even realize that. A lot of first generation students are self-directed. If you had to do things on your own, like your parents weren't able to help you with certain processes in life, you are probably a self-directed learner. That means you don't need everybody to spoon feed you information. You can pretty much figure it out on your own. And so, Victor, I'm recording this now. I'm going to post these slides. I'll let you know at the end. I have a website and I have a Facebook page, so I'll post them both there. All right, this is just a sample of like what PBL versus traditional would look like. Okay, so switching gears. So that's what would happen in your first couple of years if you were going to PBL or traditional. In the second 2 years, it's really important to know where you're going to get your hands-on training. So where you learn, who you learn on, and who you learn with matters. Here's why. If you go to, so there's value in both, right? Like this isn't a judgment issue when I say this, but if you go to a school where you're primarily training in rural or county hospitals that serve predominantly a low income community, there is a lot of value in serving that community. You're going to learn how to address social determinants of health if your providers in that area are aware enough and are doing the right things in order to do that. But if you go to an area where there's not culturally and linguistically appropriate care, and all you're doing is witnessing bias in healthcare and hearing, seeing racism and negativity all around you in spaces, well, you're learning. I mean, you're not going to probably change and be like that, but that's where you have to live and function for 2 years while you're doing your trainings. And it's good. I mean, that's good and bad, right? Like if you are not that kind of person and you want to provide equitable care, you can make a difference while you're there, because those who need that culturally appropriate care, if you're in that space, you might make a difference for them. If you don't want to deal with that yourself and you're not there, then you can go to a different space where in a more, maybe a larger city, a more urban city, you might experience more physicians who are maybe more equipped or just more excited to serve a diverse patient population. And so, I mean, it's hard to know, right? This can happen anywhere, but county hospitals tend to serve lower income individuals. Not that urban cities don't, it just depends on the hospital. So for example, if you're in New York and you're at Presbyterian, where Columbia and Cornell train, you're going to be serving people who are celebrities. You're going to be serving New York's wealthiest people. So when you're in that hospital, you should, I mean, it's kind of assumed, right? If J-Lo's having her baby at Presbyterian, J-Lo's probably mandating that the doctor is there delivering that baby, right? Probably it's not a medical student who's delivering J-Lo's baby. If you're in a county hospital and they're short staffed and you're a medical student and you're standing there in a short white coat, probably anyone who's standing there is going to help with that delivery. Same thing at Stanford. I once had a doctor tell me not to ever send any of my students to Stanford for medical school, because she said, well, if they ever want to touch patients, they'll never touch a patient at Stanford because wealthy people don't let medical students touch them. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, I guess. So these are not judgment issues. I don't really think that, I don't like the idea that low income people are treated by medical students more than wealthy people. It is what it is. So if you really want more hands-on training and you go to a county hospital where you're going to serve more underserved communities, you might get more opportunity to do things, to see things, to be right there on the front lines, to be able to practice whatever you're trying to do much sooner, versus a large private hospital that serves a wealthy population. You might get pushed to the back a little bit more because you're going to be, first of all, there's going to be a lot of people rotating through that hospital. And so you're going to be kind of last in line to touch anybody. So that matters, right? Wherever you train, you're going to get different kinds of training. It also matters because some schools are attached to health systems. So for example, if you're going to a medical school or a dental school and it has a clinical training site right on their facility, on their campus, then you get to walk out your door and go straight, across the street and go to the training site. If you're going to a school where they don't have those facilities and it's literally, an hour away or 20 minutes away, and you have to get in your car or take a train and go there every single time, right now you're like, again, thinking, oh, I don't care, I just want to get into med school. Well, yes, that's true. But if there are two schools and all things are considered equal and you like them both, and one buses you across the city to go to the facility and one is across the street, that might matter to you, but it might not, right? It just depends on the person. This is why it's not that simple as just saying like, well, my friend said this is a great school and they applied there, so I must like it too. Well, if your friend has some adversity to serving a certain patient population, and that's actually the population that you prefer to serve, that would make a difference for you, right? And so you want to make sure you do this research yourself. It's not often that hospitals are on the brink of bankruptcy, but it is something to be aware of in case you're looking at a school and it might have some issues, like if it's on probation for accreditation or something. It's oftentimes that's usually tied to the clinical sites. So you might just do a little Google search and see what's going on in the clinical settings to see if there's any issue. Anne or Amber?
Yes, I have a question about how we can find this information, like how you mentioned, like affluent hospitals might not want med students, or the patients won't want med students kind of working on them. I'm assuming this information isn't going to be on the university's website. So is there somewhere you could refer to where it's like a reliable source to find this information?
I don't know that there's a book that says like wealthy people don't want medical students to touch them. This is more just things that I've picked up over the years, working in different spaces like near Stanford and in New York City. And I've heard people talk about county hospitals a lot. So I don't know that I have a handbook of this sort of thing. You can probably talk to med students at the hospitals and ask the actual med students who are going there in their third and fourth year how much clinical training they get in their third year. So normally, if you think about rounds, if you think about how like who is in the rounds in the morning, you have your third year, second year, first year residents, then you have your fourth year med students, and you have your third year med students. Usually third year med students are going to be way in the back. Like they're not going to let third year med students be at the front. It's because the other people need the training first. And so again, like depending on how many schools rotate through that hospital, depends on how many people are on those rounds and how much exposure or sort of attention you're going to get from those the attendings. And so, no, I guess I don't have a resource for that. I've always just had students sort of look at the hospital names and the demographics of the hospital. So for example, if a hospital is a county hospital versus a large private tertiary facility, you kind of, or just a private hospital, it's not a tertiary facility, you kind of know that. You can just see what the hospital is and know what it is. And you can kind of draw some either assumptions or conclusions about how much access you might get to patients based on those. But if you really want to know, I would say ask the med students.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think making a med school list, Alex, probably happens most people in the spring of the year that they're applying. However, if you're really interested in this, you can start researching as early as you want. Just make that Excel sheet and start popping some schools in, especially like if you go to a fair like this morning and you go to different med school rooms or PA rooms, OT rooms, and start talking to people, add them to your list, and then go into Google and start doing that research. And you can start applying some of these questions to those schools.
Yeah, I wish I had started earlier because I found out today some stuff that might put me back a whole other year if I had just known it 1 year ago. So start earlier.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It is important to get access to information. This is not an intuitive process. This isn't something you want to try to do on your own. So if you have access to fairs or schools that you can talk to or advisors, try to reach out to people. If someone tries, if someone doesn't make you feel good, then find a different source, but you definitely need to get some help with this. I want to just touch upon sort of the general philosophy that schools have. You will probably find that some schools have community service and very like public health focused philosophies. And you'll realize that when you see their secondaries, and you'll also realize that when you see the types of tracks that they have. So a lot of schools will have tracks, and by tracks I mean like literal tracks that you can choose when you get there. So they might have a scholars track where you're required to do research, or they might have a community service track or an urban medicine track, or there's just so many tracks. Look at the tracks that a school offers, and once you get, when you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, well, all of these are centered around health equity, then you start to realize like, okay, this school is really obviously centered around health equity because they don't have a research track. All of their tracks are around issues that pertain to serving underserved communities. So once you realize that, that either jives with you or it doesn't jive with you, right? If you have nothing related to that work in your background, that might be a little bit harder for you to talk about in your application because you haven't done any of that work. But if you see that they have, if another different school has a research component and you've done a lot of research, that might make a little bit more sense for you when you're picking that school. What are your thoughts on regions with many medical schools? Is it harmful because many schools rotate through the same medical? Again, like look at the hospitals that are affiliated with the school. So medical schools or dental schools, they usually pay the facilities to let their students rotate. So I'll just talk about medical school right now, since that's what you're asking about. Medical schools pay hospitals to let their students rotate through them. And every medical school has a list of affiliated hospitals. And so you can look at that hospital list and see where it's located. You can Google it. You can see what they're all about, like who they serve, how big of a hospital is it. It might be in a completely different city. It doesn't mean that just because the schools are in the same region that the clinical training sites are in the same region. A lot of medical schools now send their students to a completely different city, sometimes far away, to do their rotation sites. Sometimes they're sending people out of state to do their clinical rotation sites. So if that matters to you, you might want to know that before you apply, right? So you're not angry or, frustrated. I'm going to put my link at the end. I'll tell you where you can find this recording. Okay. Oh, and I want to go back to this question. What if I haven't done any research? That's okay. If you haven't done any research, lots of people get into school without having done any research. There are probably some schools you're thinking of in your head that might be a little bit more research focused. And if that's the case and you're really nervous about it, just don't apply to those schools. You have lots and lots of options when it comes to schools. And if you're nervous about your lack of research, then seek out schools that have a more community focus, a community service focus, which there are many. So I never have believed that research has anything to do with your chances of getting in. You either love research or you don't love research, or maybe you don't know because you never tried it. But at this point, if you go to school, you're probably gonna do research when you get there, whether you love it or not. But right now, it's not gonna be the thing that's gonna get you in. It's just one of those things that you did that helps define you. All right, so we're gonna tie who we are with what the school offers. How do you know what the school offers? So we talked about going to websites. I want you to also consider like YouTubing them, Facebooking them, going to like, I didn't put this on here, but like Instagram, it's kind of old, I guess. Just go to spaces where you can see pictures of who the students look like what they look like, what they're posting about. If you go to a Facebook page of a school and all they're posting about is their, prestigious faculty who are doing these, big important things, but they never post any pictures of their students or anything the students are doing or bragging about them, I think that's really telling of what a school cares about. And so you're going to get a feel for the school. A lot of schools will post pictures of what their students do because they're really proud of their students. And if you're looking at pictures on the website, sometimes you can see photos that are kind of staged. But if you can find authentic photos like social media photos or YouTube videos that the students created themselves, like if you can find some videos that the students made and see what the culture is really like, that's really telling. And so if you're looking at that and you're like, okay, are there any people like me there? Do any of these people look like people I would want to hang out with or connect with? Take note of that feeling, and you'll feel that also when you go to your interviews. But I think that's one easy way you can kind of screen for inclusivity and just connection. It's just by trying your best to look for indicators of connection in the visual things that they put out to the universe. If you can also ask to speak to students there. You can request that they put you in touch with a student if you email the admissions people, and they'll sometimes do that. When you go to a school's website, this is oftentimes what the banner looks like. So the admissions, student life, education, news, research, these are really common tabs that go along the top. And so under each of these, I kind of listed the things that you would want to consider clicking on in order to find some of the things that I just talked about. Also, student organizations will tell you a lot about what they have. These are real clubs that I found on school sites. So you can use this as reasons for wanting to apply as well. So we are out of time, it looks like. I plan to post this presentation on my Facebook page, and it's at My Honest Advisor. That's my handle. I might also put this on my website, which is myhonestadvisor.com. But thank you so much for everyone who came today. I really appreciate hanging out, and you asked a lot of questions. I have